Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I'm sorry I missed yesterday, but I'll tell you momentarily what happened. I trust the week has gone well. We're all excited about tomorrow's main speak with Manoj Changarampat. He's the East Africa Internet and Mobile Director, and a very interesting chap actually, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. Of course, it's tomorrow at the Intercontinental. There's a link for what Mindspeak is that we put together. We serve breakfast from 9:30 a.m. We start at 10 sharp, and it's a free-to-attend forum. I'll put up a photograph of Manoj, Farid Kimani, and myself. And Farid, we were at the Galaxy K Zoom launch, and that's a camera and a half. And Farid's very kindly put together a live feed for us, which will be on our Mind Live link, but I'll put that out in a little while. We've had some great guests in 2014, and if you haven't had a chance, have a look at that link. And we've had Madame Lagarde as well, which was also a lot of fun. Mutua Matheka is a wonderful cameraman, photographer, and I like this photograph of Nairobi he's taken, and I'll post that. I must say, I had a high old time yesterday evening. The day had been busy, and I'd spent most of the time at the Intercontinental attending the Kenya Chamber Nigeria-Kenya Agri Forum. There's a lot of content I took out from there, so I'll come to that in a moment. But the point was, Nishat called me in the afternoon and said, you remember we have an invite to go to the Villa Rosa Kapinski, which is just down here, for a concert by Paco Renteria, and then a dinner organized by the Mexican Embassy. And Paco Renteria is a virtuoso, progressive flamenco guitar player. Began playing at the age of 7. By the time he was 22, Renteria was performing with the Philharmonic Orchestra of Guadalajara. Since then, he has composed over 300 pieces and performed with the likes of Carlos Santana and Luciano Pavarotti. His music has appeared in films such as Desperado and Legend of Zorro. I'll put up a photograph. I took a selfie with him, and he was really sort of very savvy on social media, doing all kinds of little clips on his phone, and he was really excellent. I'll put up a photograph of the venue, which apparently is called the Fedora Ballroom. Nishath tells me, I'm running late, so you go ahead of me. I get there, and literally, I sort of had this day on the go, and I see a line of golden tequila shots looking absolutely fantastic. And if you like tequila, which I did many years ago, and I don't drink it now, of course, but yesterday I did, and I sort of slotted 4 in about the space of 10 minutes and started to fly around the room. And there were some Corona beers as well, which I like. And I saw Gilbert of Oracle, and he said, where is the missus? And I turned to Gilbert and said, you're an observant fellow, Gilbert. I wanted to mention, but I did not, that Nisha is her father's daughter, and her father was the Coopers and Lybrand partner in Malawi. And that wrestler called The Undertaker, and apparently also the nickname of Mr. Kimani, and if you're in Kenya, you know who Mr. Kimani is, and how he does look like an Undertaker in point of fact. Well, Nishat is the auditor, not the Undertaker. And a couple of days ago, I got a call saying, you're at dinner with Charles. She was very upset with me at the Norfolk, but you ordered 5 beers beforehand. And I remembered that exactly because I'd gone to do an interview on Al Jazeera's Inside Story about the Ebola virus, and it had finished early, and I was kicking my heels, and I'd gone early to the Norfolk. And I said, darling, I got there early. And seriously, no self-respecting dolly bird is going to order green tea, because I knew there were 5 beers and green tea in that order. And what had happened was I'd been chatting to Patrick O'Barr, who is actually a board member of AFREN, and so you can understand it was an extremely interesting conversation, and he'd ordered the green tea. I'd had a few beers, and Charles had joined a little while later and had a couple as well. And the point I'm making in a roundabout way is I cannot believe that there are many partners who are subject to the level of scrutiny. And I think Gilbert intuitively understood that, and that's why I said you're an observant fellow, but did not go into the detail and the minutiae as I have done now. In fact, Nishad's attentions are actually flattering in a counterintuitive way if you think about it. And I had a great time. The music was super. I was lubricated with golden tequila shots, so thank you Paco, the Mexican Embassy, the Villa Rosa Kapinski and Nishat. Political reflections, Windows on the World is a photograph taken from the restaurant of the World Trade Center. And of course, it is the anniversary of that event. Takes me back to Don DeLillo's Falling Man. Every time she saw a videotape of the planes, she moved a finger toward the power button on the remote. Then she kept on watching. The second plane came out of that ice blue sky. This was the footage that entered the body, that seemed to run beneath her skin, the fleeting sprint that carried lives and histories, theirs and hers, everyone's, into some distance, out beyond the towers. And this is sort of a little bit tangential, but again, Don DeLillo from the same book. We are not witnessing the flow of information so much as pure spectacle, or information made sacred, ritually unreadable. The small monitors of the office, home and car become a kind of idolatry here, where crowds might gather in astonishment. Hysteria at high speeds, day to day, minute to minute. People in free societies don't have to fear the pathology of the state. We create our own frenzy, our own mass convulsions, driven by thinking machines that we have no final authority over. The frenzy is barely noticeable most of the time. It's simply how we live, she finished with a laugh. The truth was mapped in slow and certain decline. He was seeing something elaborately different from what he encountered step by step in the ordinary run of hours. He had to learn how to see it correctly, find a crack in the world where it might fit. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia tweeted this photograph of Vladimir Putin meeting with the President of China, Xi Jinping, on the sidelines of the SCO summit. And I continue to believe that turning up the heat on Putin has sent him straight into the embrace and clutches of Xi Jinping, which was an entirely predictable outcome, and one, given that they were busy pivoting to Asia, I thought was not a sensible one. Every president in the past quarter century has made the decision to bomb Iraq, apparently. Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. That was President George H.W. Bush, January 16, 1991. Good evening. Earlier today, I ordered America's armed forces to strike military and security targets in Iraq. President Bill Clinton, December 16, 1998. My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. That was President George W. Bush, March 19, 2003. My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak to you about what the United States will do with our friends and allies to degrade and ultimately destroy the terrorist group known as ISIL. President Obama, September 10, 2014. Every American president in the past quarter century has now gone on television during prime time to tell the nation and the world that he has decided to bomb Iraq. Last night was Barack Obama's turn, and it was a vexing performance, and that's a great characterization. I think that's what makes one uncertain with Mr. President Obama. Highly cerebral, but also vexing. The greatest responsibility I have as president is to keep the American people safe, he said 2 years ago. That's why I ended the war in Iraq, and he repeated that boast last night, even as he told a very different story. effectively declaring a new war of staggering scope and complexity against forces of the Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham, and other enemies in Iraq and Syria, a war that he described as having no end in sight. Australia has raised the terror alert to its highest level in a decade. Al Arabiya English tweeted this: female jihadist vows to raise ISIS flag over Britain. Well, that's interesting. Syria warns against foreign intervention. This is on Al Jazeera English. Any action of any type without the approval of Syrian government is an aggression against Syria. This is Ali Haidar, Minister of National Reconciliation Affairs. There must be cooperation with Syria and coordination with Syria, and there must be a Syrian approval of any action, whether it is military or not. The redirection risk, and that redirection against Assad, whether temporarily or accidentally or however you care to characterize it, is sky high. And then the Independent is saying, by beheading two American journalists in retaliation for US airstrikes, ISIS has shown that it will retaliate against any US or British attack. Concern is expressed about the possibility of ISIS bombers blowing themselves up in the streets of London, but they could more easily target the 2.5 million British tourists who visit Turkey every year. Then in the same article there is a bizarre section in Mr. Obama's speech in which he says we must strengthen the Syrian opposition as the best counterweight to extremists like ISIL. The only way that this could be done would be to raise a mercenary army and pretend it is the Free Syrian Army reborn, or something that Saudi Arabia and Qatar have done in the past. Pretend that jihadi groups whose ideology is the same as that of ISIS nevertheless belong to the moderate camp. The missing element in the Obama plan is the creation of the framework for new peace negotiations between Mr. Assad's government and the moderate opposition, such as it is. The Geneva II talks got nowhere because Washington insisted that the only topic of negotiation should be the departure of Mr. Assad. Since he controlled most of Syria, this was not going to happen. So in practice, US and British policy was a recipe for an endless war. I think he's absolutely right. Put up a photograph of US Secretary of State John Kerry at a Gulf Cooperation meeting in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, yesterday. Currency markets: the euro is last at 129.34, dollar index at 84.28, dollar yen 107.14, touched 107.39, which was the weakest level for the yen since September 2008. Predictably, the Nikkei has rallied to a multi-year high, because of course it's very helpful for Japan Inc. to have a weak Japanese yen. Swissy 0.9349, pound has bounced a little bit to 162.46. The Aussie 0.9078, and you remember I said it was holding in there, and of course then it crumbled. Traded as low as 0.9061. Dollar has gained for the fifth day, poised for a 3.5% advance against the Aussie dollar just this week. Indian rupee 60.795, South Korean won, that's softer, 1035.15, the Rial 229.74, Egyptian pound 714.84, and South African rand is a whisker off 11, and all I wrote later on is oh dear. The Bloomberg Spot Index, which tracks the greenback against 10 major counterparts, was little changed at 1050.06 and has advanced 1.2% this week, the most since the period ended November 1st. It touched 1050.95, the highest since July 2013. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index and refer you to a headline in Bloomberg: dollars set for best week in 10 months. And I was talking about this on the 25th of August when I said if things tip big, the dollar might soar. Dollar yen, I'll put up a 3-month chart. You can see that the yen has fallen very sharply. In euro dollar, little bit of stability of late, 129.34. Sterling, big bounce. I'm going to put up a 3-month chart, 162.46. Gained after the latest YouGov PLC survey before the September 18 Scottish vote, showed 52% support for the No campaign, a 4 percentage point lead over independent supporters. So I think ultimately the No vote will win, actually. And anyway, salmon is in the sweetest of positions. He'll get, maximum devolution if he stays within the union. Gold was lost at 1236.40. It's gone through my 1240 objective. It's at a 7-month low. Crude oil finally beginning to disconnect from gold, $93.03. Coming to Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa's all-share fell 0.06% yesterday. It's up 10.75% this year. It's at 51,230. Record high not too long ago was above 52,000. Trading volumes on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange declined to the lowest level in 10 days as the markets waited for Judge Thokozile Masipa to read her verdict in the murder trial of Oscar Pistorius. Apparently there wasn't enough evidence to prove that Pistorius was guilty either of premeditated murder or second-degree murder. Ruling on culpable homicide. I'll put up a photograph of Oscar Pistorius, and I'll put another one of him and Reva Steenkamp at the SA Sports Awards Gala dinner at the Sandton Convention Centre on November 4, 2012 in Johannesburg. Very sad story. Dollar Rand, oh dear, we might even have popped up whilst I'm doing this podcast, but we were right against 11 when I checked last. Egyptian pound is relatively well behaved, 714.90. Egyptian EGX 30 retreated 1.16% yesterday, but it's still up 39.708% this year at multi-year highs. The Nigerian all-share has been rowing back of late. It's at a 3.5-month low and minus 1.384% year to date. BBC Africa was carrying a report that Nigeria's militant Islamists have completely surrounded Maiduguri. We are convinced that the federal government of Nigeria has not shown sufficient political will to fight Boko Haram and rescue us from the clutches of the insurgents, which may ultimately lead to the total annihilation of the inhabitants of Borno. This is a forum, Borno State Elders Forum. The insurgents have rendered impassable almost all the roads leading to Maiduguri. BEF said the military needed to urgently fortify the city. The insurgents have surrounded Maiduguri and are nursing the ambition of attacking the city from all directions. And I wrote about this on the 8th of September and previously, but I was talking about what I described as the insurgency tail risk. And I was saying, the intensity of the insurgency has gone up both in Nigeria and in Kenya. And I said, that risk remains, and how it plays out, how the insurgency tail risk plays out will have important consequences for ourselves and the entire Africa Rising narrative. I've still got that link to that video where Abu Bakr Shekau with playing on Bring Back Our Girls in a very surreal video. Have a look at it. He says, "Bring back our army." And whenever I see him in any of these footage, it looks like a taunter, and a taunter is somebody, sarcastic, insulting, jeering, mocking, and that's how he acts. The Ghana Stock Exchange rallied 0.53% yesterday to close up 3.449%. They sold a $1 billion Eurobond at a coupon of 8.125%, which was much better than the market had initially expected. They got $3 billion worth of orders, so that's also an interesting sign. Investors saw fundamental long-term value in the Ghanaian economy. We have always emphasized that in the mid-term prospects for Ghana were bright, and with the coming on board of the IMF, we hope to come out of our short-term challenges pretty soon. They are set to begin talks with the IMF on Tuesday on an assistance program. Bond is a soft amortizing bond, amortizing in years 2024, 2025, and 2026, with principal repayment in 3 installments. Ghana's currency, which fell around 40% against the dollar between January and August, but has now rebounded, closed at 350 yesterday after hitting a record low of 390 in July. So people buying bottom fishing there, and rightly so. Returning to Ebola, it has turned non-linear and exponential, as I said it would way back. The Liberia finance minister says the economy is in recession. We have to tighten our belts by reducing expenditure. The IMF cut its expansion forecast for Liberia's economy to 2.5% this year from 5.9% previously. Other West African nations at the center of the outbreak also had their outlooks reduced to 8% from 11.3% for Sierra Leone and 2.4% from 3.5% for Guinea. Liberia has been worst hit by this outbreak. I'll put up a photograph that I found on WHO Ebola screening, such as body temperature checks at Lagos Airport. GDP in Tanzania expanded by 7.4% in the first quarter of 2014 compared to 7.1% a year ago, said the state-run National Bureau of Statistics. And really, it's been a bright spot, Tanzania. It's been much more stable at this elevated new normal. I attended the launch of the Kenya-Nigeria Agribusiness Forum yesterday at the Intercontinental. I tweeted and took some photographs. Most of all, Minister Adesina, the Nigerian agricultural minister, who said, "I'm an African who just happens to have been born in Nigeria." I like that. We filmed his keynote speech. It's up on YouTube, and if you go to Rich Wrap-Ups, you can link on it, and it really is a tour de force. He said Africa has no business importing food. Felix Koske, who's the agricultural minister, cabinet secretary here, says we're dead serious about this relationship, Nigeria and Kenya. Dr. Mwangi spoke of a land bridge from Lamu port to Lagos. Kiprono, who's the national chairman of the Kenya Chamber, I did a short interview with him. We filmed his speech. That link is also up on the website. Kenya has appointed a new intelligence chief amid rising Shabab threat. Major General Philip Kemeru's appointment as the new Director General of Kenya's National Intelligence Service comes nearly a year after Al-Shabaab gunmen killed 67 people in an attack on the Nairobi shopping mall. Most people who are involved in the security side have a high regard for him. Kenya's Budget Office's 10% economic growth target is unachievable. Well, I could have told them that myself. The apparent inability of the economy to regain the growth momentum after the year 2007 can be attributed to the ripple effects of the post-election violence, which reduced investor confidence. Kenya's economy has registered an average annual expansion of less than 5% in the past 5 years. The Kenya shilling has softened, as you would expect, because the dollar was so strong, but it's now trading at 88.85. It really is the Teflon shilling. Nairobi all-share had a session to the downside yesterday, down 0.38%. It remains up 16.604% this year. NSE 20 fell 0.55% yesterday. It's up 4.7706% in 2014. Mumia Sugar reported full-year earnings per share loss of 1 shilling and 77 cents a share versus 1 shilling and 9 cents previously. Revenue went up by 9.4%, but if you go through the details of the accounts and go and have a look at it, what is clear, and they made a lot of comments. Sugar industry experienced a significant deficit of sugar cane. The Western Kenya sugar belt, huge influx of illegally imported sugar. The loss after tax mainly attributable to a sharp decline in sugar selling prices as stated above, higher costs of production, and provisions made to address findings of the forensic audit commissioned by the board, and it's extremely murky. Company processed 1,926,758 tons of sugar cane, 12% higher, but the cane crushed was of a lower maturity, and therefore they got a lower sugar recovery rate. Availability of good quality cane continued to be a major challenge, they said. Ethanol distillery produced 13.63 million litres of spirit, up 210%. Ethanol revenues rose about 4 times to 1.032 billion. Cogeneration dropped 21%. And the issue at Mumias is a very simple one, point of fact, and is explained in one simple statistic. The average selling price of Mumias sugar as booked in their accounts is 30% lower on average versus the actual price it should be sold at. And that essentially is money being taken out of the business, and it's been going on for a very long time. And I said it's a blot on our capital markets, the nation which it is. And we've seen a big bifurcation of the last few years where companies are holding themselves to a higher standard, others are not. Mumias did not. And this is the absolute debacle that we're seeing. However, having said all of that, at a market capitalization now of about $37 million, there is some value in that business if somebody can push their way through it. I think that is where we're headed. Interesting, share price is trading higher today at 210, up 5%. Stock market, I think, we're still in a bull trend, but we're obviously getting a little bit more circumspect after that very strong boost higher that we had recently. I hope to see you at Might Speak. If not, I wish you a wonderful weekend.